Boy, I didn't even say anything. I just stood up here. Yeah, tall people, you know, that just happens. Yeah. Well, my name's Larry Wallach. I'm the Dean of the College of Urban and Public Affairs, and I just want to welcome everybody here tonight to what is now the third annual Bonner Equity Forum. And I just really want to thank Brian Bonner and his spouse, Ashley Ferry, who have contributed to make this possible and have done a lot of other stuff with the Bonner family for the college, for the School of Urban Studies and Planning, and just very interested in creating opportunity for students, but creating opportunity for us to do a better job in pursuing our mission of changing the world, and we share that interest with them. I want to just get right to it, and I want to introduce our president, Wim Wiewel. We're just so fortunate. You're starting your 5th year now. He's also another tall guy. This is something we have in common. Now, when Wim starts talking, you will see that he has an accent. And I know you're all going to be wondering about the accent. He's from Chicago. I'm going to tell you in advance, and that's the accent. But another thing about Wim that we're very fortunate is that his faculty appointment is in the Toulan School of Urban Studies and Planning. So there is like a 30-second to 1-minute period during the year when I am his boss. I don't know when that 30-second to 1 minute exists, but there is some point during the year when that occurs. But I'm just really very pleased to be able to introduce Wim to you. He's done such a great job in the time he's been here. He's just created so many opportunities. He has such great vision, and we're really going to welcome hearing what he has to say to us tonight.
Well, I don't know exactly when you are my boss either, but that's why I'm always real careful about you, around you, because you never know whether this might be the moment, and you never know whether this president gig is going to work out, and I may just unexpectedly return to the faculty, and I don't want to get the worst teaching assignment, so I'm always nice to all my colleagues. They're all good. Because all the urban planning students are wonderful students. They're all above average. I know, that's great. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm not going to talk very long because you're here to hear Tom Murphy. But and I had the pleasure last year to spend some time with Brian and Ashley in San Francisco. Maybe it's inmiddels 2 years, by now 2 years ago, I don't know. But it was a pleasure to have a chance to get to know you guys and hear about your interest, and of course the strong history that we're honoring. And I know that Ethan is going to say some things about Ernie later, but it is relevant. I can't resist talking just a little bit about it, because Ernie, of course, as both director of planning here in Portland, and before that planning director in Cleveland, is very much part of the history of people that I grew up with, because in Cleveland, of course, he worked with Norm Krumholtz, and my first boss in the planning field, speaking of bosses, was Rob Meir, who was at that time a professor at Illinois Chicago, but who had worked a lot with Norm Krumholtz, and then Rob Meir became not a planning director, but the Commissioner of Economic Development for the city of Chicago. And I got to see from very close up, because we had become good friends as well as colleagues, kind of what it takes to move from academia to being in the thick of politics and trying to implement things. And the book that Pierre Clavel and I then did about Harold Washington and the neighborhoods was all about how you take a lot of really great ideas that had lived in the neighborhood movement as well as in academia, and put this together in a progressive coalition of Latinos, African Americans, and progressive lakefront liberals, and make that work with somebody like Harold Washington, who in many ways was really sort of an old-time machine politician who got religion, you might say, and created a very different politics in Chicago. So then for me, fast forwarding, coming to Portland and kind of having the opportunity, yes, I'm in the academy, but I got the opportunity to run a very major institution in the city where a lot of what we do is about planning the city, planning both this part of the city in the physical and geographical sense, but working with city agencies and institutions on a whole range of issues. And as many of you know, of course, we spend a lot of time on working on what can be done in the education sector in K through 12, creating the cradle to career partnership to really impact one of the, if not the most significant system that makes a city succeed or not. And it's been a great experience for me to be able to do that, working, of course, with our own faculty, our Dean of Education, but with a mayor. Now, you know, we're going to have a former mayor speak here today. And it's been fascinating because Sam Adams, of course, had just been, he just won the nomination when I came in. He wasn't formally elected till November, 4 years ago now, but he was the only candidate, so we knew he was going to be the mayor. And then, of course, we all know he ran into some unexpected issues early on in January that greatly impacted his ability to be effective. But I got to say, while I very much look forward to working with our new mayor coming in, Charlie Hales, Mayor Adams has just been the best mayor that any university president could ever wish for as a partner. He totally gets the role of academic institutions, the role of universities in a knowledge economy, and how you create partnerships. And of course, that really culminated in the passage of the Education Urban Renewal Area, which will bring $50 million to PSU over the next 30 years, and which will be a critical part of our continued ability to serve this metropolitan area, to be able to do the buildings, the physical improvements that we need to create and maintain a great urban university. So I've really seen the difference that a mayor can make if they're really serious. Harold Washington did that, and really subsequent mayors in different ways, but now working with Sam. And I don't think he's frankly recognized enough for the great work that he has done. Again, I hope that Charlie will be as good a partner for the institution as Mayor Adams has been. So those are some of my reflections on mayoral roles, and I'm sure Tom will talk about some of that, the impact that an elected official can have. Never underestimate that. Yes, they can't single-handedly fix the economy, they can't cure poverty, but some of them can build bridges, not all of them. They can build train and trolley tracks. They can create financing mechanisms. They can create energy and enthusiasm around educational reform. They can do a lot of things that matter for our everyday quality of life. So with that, I think I'm turning it over to Ethan. Who am I turning it over to? Turning it back to you, Larry, and I very much look forward to all the remarks by the subsequent speakers. Thank you very much for being here today.
As Wim says, mayors can make a difference, and university presidents make a difference, and we're really happy to be working with you on the vision you have to make a difference. And the School of Urban Studies and Planning is second to no unit on this campus in terms of their community engagement and their fidelity to the motto of the university, which is let knowledge serve the city. And a lot of the faculty are here today, and I just want to thank them for the impact they have. And Ethan is a guy that I always look to. When I have an idea, I always go to Ethan and say, what do you think about this? Because he'll tell me if it's not a good one, and he'll build on it if it is a good one. And I just really appreciate you being able to get up here and talk about Ernie Bonner because of the experience you've had, not only in the academy, but in the community as well, and coming up through many different agencies, including being chair of the Planning Commission at one point. So Ethan, thank you.
Well, good evening, everybody, and thanks so much for coming to this Bonner Equity Forum. Ernie Bonner was a remarkable guy, and I think it's wonderful that we get together at least once a year and remember his work and his legacy, the impact that he had on our city and on all of us. He came here in 1973 to become planning director for the city of Portland at a time that Portland was in the midst of profound change, a lot going on. You know, Portland wasn't always a terrific place. Well, it was always a terrific place, but it wasn't always a really wonderful place in a lot of different ways. If you were here back in the 1960s, the Willamette River was literally toxic. There were not a lot of restaurants open. in the evening anywhere. There was not light rail, there was not Pioneer Square, there was not the Performing Arts Center, there was not the Pac West Center, there was not the US Bank Tower. I mean, you know, a whole lot of things that kind of define the image of Portland weren't here in the 60s and weren't here in the early 1970s. But it was at that period, at that point in time, yeah, that's Portland, yeah, right. There was yeah, fortunately, I was thinking, am I pointing at Pittsburgh? I said, and none of Pittsburgh was here either. But and so it was a time when there was tremendous creativity, tremendous activity, a lot of innovation going on. A lot of the things that were true about Portland then are still true about Portland today. It's a relatively accessible community. People could get in and mix it up. And people like Ernie did get in and mix it up. And Ernie in particular had a huge impact on how we were thinking about the city we would become. He came here from Cleveland where, as was mentioned, he worked with Norm Krumholtz to create the 1973 Cleveland Policy Plan, which was and remains probably the best, most complete vision of what equity could mean for a city. It's been recognized by the American Planning Association as a planning landmark. And if you go back and pick that document up today, it's still remarkable. I mean, they were talking about, you know, things in a plan that we hardly ever see in a plan. They were talking about, you know, the role that, you know, Jesus Christ played in cities and, you know, music and, you know, kind of spirituality and, you know, kind of all the different ways in which doing the right thing was, in fact, very much part of our culture and should be, in fact, part of our planning. So it was a dramatic and wonderful document, and still, I think, has stood the test of time. So Ernie came to Portland, got engaged right away in helping to essentially rethink the city. We changed gears in a lot of ways. We adopted some new ways of thinking, like, for example, that we didn't need to have a freeway that plowed its way through southeast Portland on the way to Gresham as a way to move people around the city, that we could do things perhaps in a different kind of way. Some big steps were made. After working for the city for a number of years, Ernie became engaged in the solar industry ahead of his time, working on actually trying to make solar power something that was accessible and part of everyday life in neighborhoods, and became the conservation manager ultimately for the Bonneville Power Authority, which is a huge agency, kind of quiet, kind of sits over there on the east side. You don't really hear much about them, but they have a whole lot to do with, you know, kind of why these lights are on and what it means to define our region and to make it competitive in a much broader sense. But Ernie did more than that. He was also a Metro councilor at the time that Metro was created. You know, we have the best elected regional government in the entire United States. And it remains the, oh yeah, thank you, and Rex Burkholder, Metro Councilor, is here. It also remains the only directly elected regional government in the United States. And it's the best one, by gosh. And Ernie was part of creating that. In fact, I met Ernie in 1981 when I started working at Metro many, many years ago, and Ernie was on the Metro Council and hatching plans for what Metro would become and how that would affect so much of what's true about this region today. So we were very fortunate to work with the Bonner family beginning about 6 years ago to establish the Ernie Bonner Fellowship and now the Bonner Equity Forum. The whole notion was that we needed to, like, not just, you know, kind of recognize and celebrate the achievements. What we really needed to also do was lay the groundwork for the next generation and for making sure that the work was not just an end in itself, but became a vehicle for engaging more people, for getting more people involved in this kind of work, and for becoming the next generation of Ernie Bonners. What could be a better testament to anybody than to see the core principles and values carried through into a new era, and this is a new era. So thanks to the incredible generosity of the Bonner family, Ashley and Brian, Chris and Lee, Lynn Bonner, who is here. Lynn, I know the traffic is horrible, and it's so great to see you. I'm glad you're here. Established the Bonner Fellowships. Now I think we've directly served 12 students over the last 6 years with the fellowships, 2 students a year, who are selected because of their interest in and commitment to equity as a cornerstone for their practice. And that's really kind of what we're looking for, to kind of make sure that that continues on. And this forum is a part of that as well. So I think Ernie would be very happy with a lot of what's been happening here in the last 48 hours. And I think he would also be extremely happy with the Bonner Scholars. I think he would also be delighted that we live in a city that's grappling with what it means to serve equity as an overarching goal. We may not know exactly what that means, but you know, it's on the table in an explicit way. That's astonishing, right? That's really actually quite amazing, and now it's up to us to try and make something of that. And so with this forum, hopefully we'll all get some new ideas and some new inspiration for taking the next step to make Portland actually known, not just as being a great place to ride a bike, but a great place for the least of us. Because as Ernie used to point out continuously, planning and what the city does should create more choices for those who have fewest. And that's absolutely at the core of this entire struggle, and at the core, I think, of our hopes for what this work will mean in the years to come. So Bonner family, thank you so much, and we'll hear more from you in a little bit, but right now I want to turn it over to Matthew Gephardt, who will introduce our speaker. Thank you.
I have to say it's awfully intimidating to be following three fantastic speakers here, but it is my privilege to introduce tonight's speaker, Mayor Tom Murphy. Mayor Murphy is currently a ULI Senior Resident Fellow and Klingbeil Family Chair of Urban Development. It's a role that takes him all over the world. We were lucky enough to get him on his way back from Australia, where he was speaking about the current challenges of making a dynamic, sustainable, equitable cities in the current global environment. But Mayor Murphy's probably best known for his time as mayor of Pittsburgh between 1994 and 2005, and for the impressive transformation that Pittsburgh went through during his 3 terms in office. Ernie Bonner is remembered for being instrumental in the renaissance of downtown Portland and for opening up the riverfront for people. Coincidentally, Mayor Murphy was known for that as well, for doing the same in Pittsburgh, for using public-private partnerships to leverage over $4.5 billion in investment in the city. Through these partnerships, he oversaw the transformation of over 1,000 acres of brownfield sites into viable use, the creation of 25 miles of riverfront trails and green space, the revitalization of downtown Pittsburgh. He also led efforts to secure over $1 billion in funding for 2 new sports stadiums, as well as a new convention center, which was the first certified green convention center ever built, and the largest, I still believe, the largest certified green building in the U.S. So Pittsburgh has a well-deserved reputation for being a successful transformation from an industrial economy, and Mayor Murphy was at the forefront of that, of efforts to develop Pittsburgh in a way that would capture the growth and benefits of new ventures and new technologies. And in particular, he recognized the key roles that institutions play in that, making new partnerships with Carnegie Mellon University and the University of Pittsburgh in a way that would allow them, and I'm going to paraphrase a line here that I really like, allow them to let their knowledge serve the city. So he was instrumental in doing that. Now, this forum and this talk couldn't come at a better time for us and for our region. Portland has a new mayor-elect. It's in the process of updating the comprehensive plan, and is confronting all sorts of new challenges in the current economic environment, which isn't quite that favorable as of yet. Now, unfortunately, I never had a chance to meet Ernie Bonner, but in reading the material that he left in the amazing archive that we have at Portland State, I'm struck by his commitment to making Portland a more economically competitive place, but also one that was more equitable. I'm struck by just how important and relevant the questions he was asking then still are for us today. So questions about how we encourage economic development while ensuring that that economic prosperity is shared among all, and particularly with those who are the least well off. How do we invest in infrastructure and quality of life improvements while ensuring that everyone has access to these, particularly those who have the least access? How do we build robust partnerships to realize our goals? And what role do each of us have in being leaders and advocates in trying to answer those questions? So we've invited Mayor Murphy here tonight to share with us his lessons and insights from decades of public service and leadership, and to stimulate our thinking about how we might move forward, and to lead us in a discussion of a variety of different issues here. In short, to help us figure out how we can compete in a changing world and build a vibrant, equitable, and sustainable 21st century city. So please join me in welcoming Mayor Tom Murphy.
I'm very honored to be here. I'm very honored to be here to represent the Bonner Forum. Thank you, Brian, for inviting me, and Mrs. Bonner. I very much appreciate being here, and I'm really humbled to be in Portland, Oregon, and talking about cities, because you are one of the real leaders in America. I mean, I speak and I go to lots of cities, and you are put up often as one of the real models of how cities ought to operate. Maybe up close it doesn't look as good, but know that people believe that you are really one of the great examples of American cities. I'm going to talk about equity at different levels. One is equity between regions, and the challenge in America is there are regions like Pittsburgh not too long ago that was a failing region, and we have Detroit and others, big cities and small towns that are trying to figure out who they are, because the economy of the world has fundamentally pulled the rug out from under them. And what are they going to be, and how do their citizens succeed? And you benefit from that in a sense because people leave those areas and come to other places. And I want to talk about that. And I want to talk about, first though, the changes taking place. And the fact that every city in America, in fact in the world, I come from Australia, is facing a redefinition of who they are. And Pittsburgh, for example, faced that in many ways earlier than what other cities are doing, and faced it in a much more traumatic way. Other cities are doing okay, and so they're less likely to feel the imperative to want to change. You might be one of those where you're feeling pretty good about yourselves, and maybe you're not as likely to change. And I think that is to rest on your laurels is a fatal choice to make. And I think this is all about choices communities have to make, and that's what I want to talk about. And I have to point this, yes. But first I want to talk about a guy named Horatio Nelson Jackson. Anybody know who he is? You don't know your history. Let me tell you about him. Horatio Nelson Jackson was a doctor from Vermont, and he was in California at a medical convention at the dinner with a group of other doctors, and they were debating the impact of the automobile in American society. And all the doctors, as smart as they were, thought it was really a toy for the rich, was never going to have any impact. And Horatio thought it was going to be a game changer on society, and he bet them all $50 that night he could drive across the United States in 90 days. The very next day, he went out and bought his first car. He convinced the young mechanic, Sewell Crocker, to go with him. And they bought a dog named Bud that day for whatever reasons, and the very next day, they're on the road driving across the United States. It's 1903. And in 1903, there were 8,000 cars in America, 150 miles of paved road, and no highway department in any state. 63 days later, Horatio, Sewell, and Bud drove down Fifth Avenue in New York City. They were the first people to drive across the United States. By 1923, sort of what planners talk about, by 1923, there were 10 million cars, hundreds of thousands of miles of paved road, and a highway department in every state. Society as we knew it changed dramatically. In 1903, there were 53,000 harness makers in America. By 1923, there were 2,000. We are there now. We are sitting where Horatio Nelson Jackson sat in 1903, and you're going to be the smart doctors, or you're going to be Horatio Nelson Jackson that sees the future. The world is getting redefined through globalization, through demographics, through technology in ways that are only we're at the very beginning of that definition. One is if you're on the East Coast, whether you're in Boston or New York or Baltimore or Norfolk or Savannah or Charleston or Miami or Gulfport or New Orleans, they're all spending $500 million or more to expand their ports to chase the expansion of the Panama Canal that will open in 2014. It is driving huge infrastructure investments on the East Coast because they believe a lot of the China traffic will not stop at Long Beach but come through the Panama Canal. Whether that's true or not is redefining the whole East Coast transportation network as people chase this traffic. You're not going to read this in the back, but these are the employment changes in a variety of cities in America in the last 20 years. Just in the last 20 years, if you want to talk about living in the middle of a revolution, Philadelphia lost 50% of its manufacturing jobs in the last 20 years. So Philadelphia had a little bit, about the same amount of jobs in manufacturing as they did in education, healthcare, and technology. In 20 years, they have now almost 3.5 times more technology-related jobs than they do manufacturing jobs. Portland is one of the least, you've maintained your manufacturing jobs, or maybe you lost them prior to 1990. I don't know. Pittsburgh lost ours, a lot of them. But you have increased by dramatically your jobs in education and healthcare and professional jobs. These are the numbers you're seeing all over the country. And so when those cities are making choices about the kind of infrastructure they're going to invest in. And by the way, if I look at this, what do you think is the single most important raw material those communities need to compete in that new economy? Education. And what's the controversy in every state and every community in America is whether we want to invest in education. And yet we're watching whole economies get redefined. And if I'm talking about investments of infrastructure, what do I want? Do I want to invest in a new road to an industrial park in the suburbs? Or do I want to invest in transit that gets people easier to the universities in the area around the universities? They're the choices that communities need to make today to decide whether they're going to be a 21st century city and how they compete and the role that those jobs have. I'm not suggesting that manufacturing is going to go away. There's a new steel mill just 20 miles north of Pittsburgh being built. And friends of mine are involved in it. It's a $2 billion investment. And I ask them, I mean, I love Pittsburgh, but why are you building a steel mill here? And they said, because labor costs don't mean anything anymore. Because where it would take 10,000 people to make steel, it takes 700 now. Because of the impact of technology. And so smart manufacturing is going to be a driver in our economy. Education is at the key to that, and research is at the key to that also. And then the demographics, I mean, isn't that the most famous word in America now? Of course, Rush Limbaugh says demographics don't matter. We just weren't conservative enough. I'm joking. He did say that. My daughter called me and said, we have to hope that. He continues to say that. Demographics are redefining America. People like me are making choices. If you're old enough to get the AARP magazine, you know almost every month there's an article about where people want to live that are the baby boomers, and it is walkable. Places where in big cities or small towns where people don't have to drive everywhere and they have good transit, and it has good educational facilities that they can go to schools. I was at a class this afternoon, and I think 2 people in the class were just auditing it. They were retired people that just came back to school. You know, people want to have that opportunity to be able to do that. And then the next one is the Gen Yers, the sort of 20 to 32 years. It's the largest generation in the history of America. 83 million of you are scholars. And you're making really radically different choices. You're 6 times less likely to have a driver's license than your parents. That's a General Motors survey. They're terrified. Because that love of the automobile is that we all grew up with they think is disappearing. But you're also graduating from college with on average a $25,000 debt. Shame on us for forcing you to have to do that, to make that choice to get an education. And so this generation is going to look at where they live, and ULI has done some surveys of Gen Yers. 75% of them in our survey want to live in, guess where? Walkable urban neighborhoods. They don't want to have to depend on a car to drive. They don't want that suburban living. They might have grown up there, but their choices are very different. And so this has huge implications for the real estate industry, where, you know, some of you are not going to know who Ozzie and Harriet is. How many don't know who Ozzie and Harriet is? It scares me to death, right? I'm getting old. A lot of you don't. Ozzie and Harriet were TV stars in the 1960s that sort of defined who we were. And, you know, and they were mom and dad, 2 kids, a white picket fence, a car in the driveway, and a house in the suburbs. And they were 75% of the households in America in 1960 fit that image. And today it's less than 30%. And so we are watching just a redefinition of the demographics. And then you add to that the immigration in America that we've been hearing nothing about since the election. And that is redefining what it looks like. And these are the choices prior to the recession, or right in the beginning of the recession. These are the choices in housing that people were beginning to make. And so in the 1990s in Chicago, for example, 77% of the building permits issued in metropolitan Chicago in the 1990s were issued in the downtown or the near downtown Chicago, only 7%. By 2008, 45% of the building permits issued in the Chicago metropolitan area were being issued in downtown or near downtown. Chicago, if you've been there, has added 150,000 people to the neighborhoods in the downtown and the surrounding neighborhoods in Chicago. Out by McCormick Place, completely transformed the neighborhood over the last 10 or 15 years. This is happening here. Look at in Portland, in the 1990s, 9% of your building permits in your metropolitan area were being issued in the downtown. Look at what has happened, 38%. And people in real estate will say, well, this was just a cycle. It's not a cycle. It's not simply cyclical. This is a fundamental redefinition of what we think of as society in America. And it has huge implications. All the smart real estate people I talked to, when the recession hit, said, oh, the green stuff's going to go away. Nobody's going to be able to afford it. We're not going to think about it again. In fact, through the recession, it accelerated. It now would be hard-pressed to find a Class A office building that's not a certified green building. I, in fact, find very few developers talking about developing anything without talking about it being certified in one way or the other or green. This is not being driven by government regulation. This is being driven by the marketplace. It is not cyclical. It's a fundamental redefinition of how we think about buildings. So I mention all that because I think that what a city aspires to in the 21st century are going to look very different than what a city looked like in the 20th century. And I want to talk a little bit about what I think are the ingredients for a successful 21st century city. The first is about management. And for me, the best example, having been a former mayor, of what good management about is the crime management of New York City. And I just happened to be with Rudy Giuliani in Australia, and he gave a speech there, and I heard him talk about this. And in the late 1980s and early 1990s, the homicide rate in New York City, can you imagine, hit 2,300 people were murdered in 1 year. You might remember the Time magazine had a cover story with a big picture of a rotting apple, the rotting of the Big Apple, because New York City was losing its ability to attract tourists, it was losing companies, and it was losing the confidence of its citizens to want to live there because of this. If cities don't get this right, the basic management, nothing else is going to work. If people don't feel safe on the streets, and so literally, as you can see, in a year, Rudy Giuliani cut that crime rate fivefold, that homicide rate. New York City continues to be the safest city per capita in America. It wasn't that he chased all the bad guys to New Jersey. I mean, some people would accuse him of doing that. It was that he changed how we thought about managing crime. You see it on the television shows now, the Comstat, of how you manage crime in real time and how you get in front of the crime rather than reacting to it. And he made a huge decision in how to apply technology to managing crime. And he changed how we all talked about it in America and how we began to manage our police forces. And so the idea of how you manage becomes a very important one. I was talking to Rex, and you're the only one in the country that has this kind of decision making. The mayor of Denver, recognizing that Denver couldn't do this by themselves and the sprawl was killing the very values of Denver, brought together 32 mayors and 7 counties, Republican and Democrat, conservative and liberals, and they all stood together and convinced the voters to raise their sales tax to support the construction of a 120-mile transit system. And if you're in Denver, you see that now under construction. And if you go there, I encourage you to go down to 6th Street Mall to Union Station, and you'll see over $1 billion worth of new construction taking place in office buildings and residential development where this transit system meets. You'll see transit-oriented development beginning to happen along some of this line that's open. It completely is redefining how Denver thought of themselves as a region. It is a remarkable example. And again, I think one of the issues of how you manage yourselves, of how people in a community come together. Portland's not Portland. You know, we have these state boundaries and these local boundaries that have no meaning today in a global conversation. And people in Washington State come here to work probably every day. And how you all talk about yourselves, the fact that you created a regional council with authority and responsibility is a pretty remarkable story. No place else in America has done that. And that is the best way to get to this issue. Another one I want to talk about, this is a little city, and you've done this through your growth boundaries, but will give you some sense of how the choices that you again have to make. This is Tallahassee, Florida. And Tallahassee, Florida, over the next 20 years, expects to add 50,000 new households. And they modeled this out. And Rex, I don't know if you've done this or not here, but you might want to look at it. They modeled this out. So if everybody gets their 1 acre of heaven, so 50,000 people each develop on 1 acre, it will cost $10 billion in infrastructure costs. $10 billion to give everybody their 1 acre of heaven. If 8 units per acre are built, which is sort of a townhouse, single-family detached development, it will cost $1 billion in infrastructure investments over the next 20 years for Tallahassee. And if 20 units are built per acre, which is a sort of a new urbanist development, some apartments, some townhouses, some single-family detached, it will cost only $500 million. That's a choice a community can make today. You made that in part by creating a regional council that thinks about this land use issue. If communities are going to develop without thinking about the connection of transportation, other infrastructure to land use, they will indebt their future, their kids and to make it a very expensive place to live because they will not thought this through. And so this is an equity issue about how communities make choices to grow and how they want to make their investments. The other thing of a city, this is the Chicago Millennium Park. And if you've been there, you know it is the most visited place in Chicago now. Do you know the history of it? Let me just tell you the story, because this is the kind of choice a community can make too. Mayor Daley, that was a railroad yard, and Mayor Daley wanted to buy the railroad yard when it was abandoned by the railroad and put a 2-story parking garage underneath and cap it with a grass field. And he went to the citizens of Chicago, some of the leading citizens, and he said, would you help us support this? And they said, well, really, if we're going to do this, why would we just do a grass field? Why don't we build something really world-class, spectacular? And so what Mayor Daley envisioned as a $50 million cost went to $500 million, most of it raised from the civic leadership of Chicago. There is now $2.5 billion worth of new real estate development around Millennium Park. You can see the condos and the towers. It is the most visited place in Chicago. It's a choice. A community can be an it'll-do community. Say, you know, that's the best we can do, that's all we can afford. Or it can decide to reach for the stars and be world-class. And that's what the citizens of Chicago challenged the mayor to do with Millennium Park. Every city, every citizen ought to challenge its leadership to not think incrementally, but to think strategically about how you build a world-class city. And that's part of the challenge. This is about the education. I don't need to. The top green line are people over the last 3 years that have college educations, have added a significant number of jobs during the recession in this recovery. The red line are people that have a 2-year degree. In the blue line are people that don't have a degree beyond high school. And this is the choices that communities make and how they support children and young people to support themselves in doing that. It would be, you know, it is the single most important investment a community can make in equity, is positioning their kids to compete in this economy. And these are, I won't ask you to look at them, these are the changes in educational attainment over the last 20 years by some cities. You're doing okay. You know, Pittsburgh got ahead of you in the number of the percentage of high school graduates. We started as one of the lowest in the country over 25 or 30 years ago, And now 91%, 92% of our citizens are high school graduates, and you're only 90%. You're falling behind. I want you to particularly look at the research triangle. High school graduation is not as high, but I want you to look over graduate degrees. Research triangle, because I'm going to talk about that in a little while, is up there competing with Boston and San Francisco. How did that happen? What were the choices they made to permit that to happen? And so one of the other ingredients I think that will make cities competitive is what I call the raw materials. And that's the investment in research. The United States invests $400 billion a year in research. About a third of that comes from the federal government. It goes largely to universities and private to research institutions. I believe that our competitive advantage in America is our ability to innovate, is our ability to, whether it's in manufacturing and improving the processes or inventing new projects. And this is us compared to the rest of those blobs are all different countries. And as you can see, the United States far and away invests more in research than any other country in the world. And that investment is driving economies in funny different ways now. And I'm going to give you an example in 3 places. I'll just talk about the one in Las Vegas. The city of Las Vegas gave Cleveland Clinic $100 million to move a research facility to Las Vegas, to partner with a brain center, a small brain center was there in a large development called Symphony Park. And when the mayor did the groundbreaking for this, he said, you know, you'll be able to come to Las Vegas and gamble and get your brain operated on at the same time. True story, okay? In New Orleans, there's right now, if you go there, $2.2 billion being invested in a medical research complex of LSU and Tulane building new medical schools and because they want to become an innovation center. They're chasing this here. And I mentioned Las Vegas and New Orleans because you don't think of them as the hotbed of innovation. You think of them as the hotbed of other things, but not innovation. They want what you have. They want what you have. And one of the ingredients, so I want you to, for a moment, think of that raw material. As we would say in Pittsburgh, coal in the ground. That coal in the ground has no value being in the ground. You need to build an infrastructure to take advantage of it. That infrastructure is an entrepreneurial climate in the universities that permits that technology to move easily to commercialization. It means that there's risk capital available. And the risk capital is really a critical part of this. And the good news is that venture capital in the United States is by far the most available in the world. People from all over the world want to come here to get their companies funded. The bad news is that 2/3 of the venture capital invested in the United States is invested in 3 areas, and Portland's not one of them. It's Silicon Valley, it's Boston, and it's the New York area. So how many of you saw The Social Network? So what does Mark Zuckerberg do? Right, he starts his company in Boston, and when he's a student at Harvard, and he just wants to get to 1 million people on Facebook. And he needs capital to get the equipment and everything he needs to get to that 1 million people. And his friends say, well, you got to take this idea to San Francisco because that's where most of the venture capital is. And he does, and Facebook's in California, and it has 800 million people on it now. And Boston has an inferiority complex about this and has recently created a whole program to try to not lose the future Mark Zuckerbergs. The question is, are you losing your future Mark Zuckerbergs? Because they can't find the opportunity here. And that was Pittsburgh's story. And it's a lot of stories all across the country is that the venture capital often shows up and says, that's a great idea. We'd love to support you. We'd like you to move the company to Silicon Valley or to Boston. And I could give you dozens of examples where that was happening in Pittsburgh. And so that venture capital, you're doing okay. You're not with Silicon Valley, but this is your history over the last 10 years of, on average, probably anywhere from $150 to $200 million of venture capital and anywhere from, 20 to 30 startups per year. Pretty average and pretty good. You know, and when I talk about that relationship to the universities, maybe only 15 to 20% of the startups in your community are going to come out of the universities, but it's going to create a climate of people wanting to invest, and it creates an infrastructure. The university is a big driver of that. And you get somewhere around $350 million a year in research dollars invested in the two major universities within Portland also. This gives you a sense of what that technology economy is doing. In the last 18 months, the technology economy has created jobs 4 times faster than the economy on average, the normal economy. And these are some cities around the country that are becoming on the map, some like Silicon Valley and Boston, well known. Others like Pittsburgh, or you're on there, Portland, Austin, are cities that are up and coming, that are really beginning to build a significant part of this economy. Let me now just talk a little bit about, I want to underline first the word intentionality. Silicon Valley and Boston, I don't think are good models, because I think they largely happened organically. Not to say that there weren't key important leaders there, but they really start after World War II, huge federal investments, great universities, people that see opportunity to start jobs. Nobody's thinking about it, it just sort of happens. And I think that what is really important for us to understand in America is the intentionality, that communities can make a choice about transforming their economy in a different kind of way. And you have all the ingredients, more so than most places I go to visit. And you've done that. But I think the first one to do this in America was in the 1960s, was the Research Triangle in North Carolina. You had Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill, great universities. And you had, and literally true story, 6 guys are at a country club lamenting the fact, get rained out, lamenting the fact that, sitting in the bar, they were lamenting the fact that their sons and daughters they send them away to college and they don't come back because there's nothing to do but work in tobacco and lumber. And so those 6 guys went and bought 7,000 acres of property, old tobacco fields between Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill, and created what we now know as the Research Triangle, where there is 40,000 people working, the highest per capita and the highest per capita education and income in the country. It transformed completely. They partnered with the universities and with the government officials. It continues to be driven by a nonprofit organization, and it transformed the economy of that region in a remarkable way. If you go there, you'll see it. It's remarkable what has happened there. Down the road a ways in San Diego, if you've been in San Diego in the 60s and 70s, you remember it as a sleepy naval town. The mayor, the leadership of the mayor, the business leadership, working with the university system in California when it was healthy, convinced the university regents to invest heavily in an engineering school in San Diego. And out of that has spun out Qualcomm and hundreds of other companies. San Diego, in the last 30 years, has become the 6th biggest technology economy in the country. It's a remarkable story of transformation, moving from the Navy still the biggest employer, technology is the 2nd largest employer in that economy. Johns Hopkins in Baltimore is the recipient of the largest amount of research dollars in the country. $1.8 billion a year on average they get. They do a dismal job of creating value from that. They create, University of San Francisco creates 10 times more companies a year than Baltimore, because they have not historically had a culture of entrepreneurship and innovation. They have innovation going on, but commercialization they didn't do. They are working with a private developer, Surrey Forest City Development, that have built now several buildings adjacent to the Johns Hopkins University to begin to try to do that transformation, beginning to move towards how do you create Baltimore not just as a port city and a tourist city, but an innovation city. And they have the raw materials, which historically have never taken advantage of. Central Florida, you think, when I say Orlando, what do you think about? Disney World, right? And if you go just east of the Orlando airport, there was a developer around thousands of acres there, and Jeb Bush, when he was governor Florida committed $300 million to attract the Burnham Research Facility from La Jolla, California, to build a facility in what is called Central City. The developer donated 600 acres of land to build what is now called Medical City, where there's a medical school, several hospitals, a major research facility, and not 5,000, but now 15,000 jobs have been created there in the last 7 years. Technology-related jobs. So it's redefining Orlando in a different kind of way. Finally, let me talk to you about another city that underwent a transformation. By the way, I want to point out that Rex is one of our failures. Rex here is your consul. He's one of our failures because he left Pittsburgh. And what Rex did, 500,000 other people did. This is about equity, regional equity. Between 1970 and 1990, 500,000 people left Pittsburgh. We had a population, a regional population of 2.7 million. In 20 years, it dropped to 2.2 million. Because people couldn't see, people like Rex, and his whole family, 7 of them, he told me, all left. It came to Portland, by the way, every one of them. So I'm mad at you all. They all left because they couldn't see a future for themselves in Pittsburgh. We were collapsing. We were defined by the steel industry. And 70% of the steel made in the United States was made in Pittsburgh during World War II. My father worked in a steel mill for 51 years. And there was a bridge we call the Hot Metal Bridge, where he would tell me when I was growing up, you know, that bridge is the most strategic bridge in America. 25% of the steel made in America every day comes across that bridge. In 20 years, it all disappeared. It was a tragedy. So the people that were leaving were young people, couldn't see a future, weren't going to work in the mill, went all over the country. That's why we have so many Steeler fans everywhere, because they left Pittsburgh. And I bet there's a Steeler bar here in Portland somewhere. And I'm getting some nods there, right? And so we were faced with a city that was one of the most environmentally degraded places in America, a legacy of 100 years of heavy industrial development, and a challenge of how we transform that in a city that was declining in a really rapid way in terms of losing population and disinvestment in the city. Corporations were making choices not to want to live there. And I became mayor in 1994. I was in the legislature prior to that, and so I was grappling with this whole economic change. And it's a very difficult and contentious issue because you have people that can't see what the future is going to look like, and they're leaving. You have others that just want to hold on to what was there, even though it's disappearing very quickly. And so it's a very difficult challenge to begin to talk about Pittsburgh. Let me just say, Pittsburgh was once known as hell to live on. It was ranked as one of the most environmentally degraded cities in America 30 years ago. The Economist magazine and Forbes magazine this year have ranked Pittsburgh as the most livable city in America. I was just in Australia, it was mentioned, in Melbourne, and Melbourne's ranked as the most livable city in the world in the same magazine. And I want to say that to you because Pittsburgh, though it's ranked #1 in America, is the 39th city in the world, which says something about American cities and however they measure this, okay? And so I wouldn't ever suggest that Pittsburgh should be ranked ahead of Portland, but the fact that we did this remarkable transformation, how did that happen? It was really around how the city, the universities, and the civic leadership and the business leadership came together to shape a different vision for Pittsburgh than what existed. It was probably one of the most remarkable transformations of any city. And so this is an example. This is Southside Works. This is where my father worked for 51 years. It was a steel mill. And we did this. When I became mayor, I had a choice. This is one of those choices. I could manage decline, and Pittsburgh was declining. We were losing 20 to 30,000 people a year and losing jobs. Or I could take some huge risk and try to make Pittsburgh a city where people would think about wanting to live and invest. In this city, we're flat broke as a city. Imagine losing half your population. You could spend all your money, the money that you have, just tearing houses down and stopping kids from shooting each other. But if you do that, nothing changes. You're like the hamster on the wheel. You're going to stay in place, and staying in place in a 50-year trend of decline, sort of managing decline, is not a good choice. And so we made a very difficult decision to take some money out of our operating budget. It was huge fights within my new administration and the community at large about shifting money to buy. So the first year I became mayor, we bought 1,500 acres of steel mills. Well, the first time I ran for re-election, 4 years later, my opponent had pictures of all these old steel mills that we bought, saying the mayor's wasted your money buying all those when we could have hired more police. Every city has that choice. And I believe that cities need to recognize they need to invest to be well managed, but they also need to invest in the future. They need to have resources that they're willing to take a risk on to invest in a future in shaping their city to compete. And so we made that decision in a very difficult environment. We bought 1,500 acres. This was a 130-acre steel mill that we invested in. And you can see we invested $130 million in dealing with it. I mean, think about this. In a declining economy, in a huge population loss every year, I'm going to a developer and say, hey, I want you to invest in an old steel mill and build housing or retail or commercial. And they're looking at like, you're nuts. I'd rather go buy a farm out in the country, which you can't do here, I guess, and develop it. And it's so much easier to do than invest in an old steel mill. So we need to figure out how we share the risk with the developer, how we build a partnership with the developer. We want the developer to make money. We don't want them to pick our pocket. How do we get them to think about investing in Pittsburgh? How do we make that happen? And why is that so important? Because if somebody builds, PNC Bank is a big bank in Pittsburgh, and they make a choice about building an operations center that's going to employ 3,000 people. If they make a choice to build that out in the suburbs with big surface parking and no public transportation, it might as well be in Cleveland for 30% of the population of Pittsburgh because they can't get there. But if we can get them to think about investing and building that in the city, which they did, then we build a transit stop and we put a parking garage into it, then those jobs become accessible. And then we work with PNC to create a network that provides the training and moves people from poverty into those employment opportunities. And so making those connections, which I'll talk about a little later, were very important. But the first was the real estate. Is you need to get the jobs to invest here on an old steel mill. And you needed to get developers to want to be willing to take the risk with you to be a partner in doing that, to be able to share your vision of how you shape a city. And this is what's there today. And so we're 10,000 men and women made steel. There's now a cheesecake factory. And 600 units of housing and a dozen or more office buildings. And you know, my father would shoot me if he were alive. That we did this, but instead of taking an abandoned steel mill, we converted it into this. And the universities, I mentioned that, were very important partners. In a very intentional way, we work with our universities. And in fact, we as a city financed an innovation center on the Carnegie Mellon University campus. This was a center where existing companies like Microsoft and Google could hang their hat. It wasn't an incubator for new businesses, but for existing businesses where they could hang their hat and just work and research with Carnegie Mellon and some of the joint research. And remember that, because I want to make a connection through Home Depot. Home Depot, big deal, right? So we bought big pieces of land like whole steel mills, and we bought other pieces of land, and one of the pieces of land we bought was an old Sears site in a failed urban renewal project in the 1960s and 70s. How many are architects and planners in this room? So if you're old enough, what were you all smoking and drinking in the 60s and 70s, right? I felt like we had to tear everything down. And this was one of the failed urban renewal projects. It was heavily invested in and it failed. And so Sears left 20 years earlier, and it was a really gritty urban neighborhood. And we made a decision when we bought the site. We said, what's going to re-enliven this? Was one time a healthy commercial area. what was going to get rich people and poor people to come back to this neighborhood to shop. And we decided it was a Home Depot. It's 10 miles from the nearest interstate and 15 miles from the nearest Home Depot. And so we called up the real estate people at Home Depot and said, we'd like you to think about putting a store there. And they laughed at us and said, this is not where we would think about putting a store. And I called up the mayor of Atlanta and said, tell me about the two guys that owned Home Depot. And he told me about Arthur Blank and Bernie Marcus, but he said particularly Bernie Marcus is very philanthropic and very active in national Jewish affairs around the country. So we went to our friends in the Jewish community and asked them to invite Bernie Marcus to one of the many dinners they have. And he comes, and a friend of mine hosts him at a reception, and my bodyguard who carried a gun and I went up to him and said, we're kidnapping you. True story. And he looked at us like we were nuts, and we said, no, we want you to go look at something. And we put him in a car, took him out to this site and said, share our dream with us. We think you can be the catalyst to change this neighborhood. We need you to put a store here. This is in 1996, 97. Home Depot did not have urban stores back then. And so at the end of the dinner, Bernie came up to me and said, we'll put a store there, but you need to work with us on it. And he called me every 3 months to tell me what we were doing right and what we were doing wrong. And so Home Depot came there, and it was the best partnership I've ever had with any company. Home Depot, 18 months before we make the deal, it's 18 months before the store opens, we set up a process where we recruit from that neighborhood. It's a very low income neighborhood. And Bernie was particularly worried about crime, and so we opened a police station on the Home Depot site. The parking is not as big as you would see in a suburban, so it's a much more urban store. And we had stores around the edge of the parking lot that attract, so people could go to Home Depot and then go somewhere else and shop and not have to get in the car. And we set up a process where we would have a neighborhood recruitment office to recruit local people to work in that store. 80%, we open the store, the people get hired. Bernie Marcus calls me up 2 months after the store opens and said, you set aside a little parcel over there for parking for our employees. He said, you can develop it. He said 80% of the people working in the store are coming from our neighborhood. It was a remarkable opportunity to create a path road for people who never imagined, and really the best part of the story, and I'm not making it up, is this young guy who had never worked in retail is one of the first people we hire. And Home Depot, we just think he's going to be a clerk in Home Depot. Home Depot sees something in him, sends him out to a store, and he comes back as the manager of that store. It's a remarkable example of how the public sector and the private sector can work together to create huge opportunities for people who wouldn't have thought about having those opportunities. So we get a Home Depot, a young developer from that area comes to me and says, you know what you did there is pretty remarkable. I think I can get Whole Foods. Now, for you, Whole Foods is no big deal. For us, we did not have a Whole Foods store in the whole Pittsburgh region, okay? People heard about it, it was legendary, but we didn't have anything like it. We had just basically one big supermarket chain. And so Whole Foods, this guy, we partner with Whole Foods, we provide a subsidy to this developer to take an old warehouse, we get Whole Foods. This Whole Foods store that opens is their Rookie of the Year store. It has the highest sales per volume of any store in the country. It also has the highest percentage of food stamps per square foot of any store in the country. It says that poor people want to eat well, given the opportunity. And so then it goes on. Target comes in. We built 700 new houses in the neighborhood. This is over a 10-year period. And there's a big old vacant Nabisco building in that neighborhood, 8 stories. Nabisco had abandoned it 15 years ago. Google, that's in that collaboration center I mentioned, is doing a research. They start with 2 people. They keep growing. They finally outgrow the collaboration center. They come to the city and they come to CMU and they said, this research project's really working. We want to open 1,000 jobs in Pittsburgh. And we want to go in this, not out in that suburban park out there. We want to go in this vacant Nabisco factory in this gritty neighborhood. I was just out there a couple weeks ago. 70% of their workforce either walks or rides a bike to work. It's a neighborhood that you wouldn't have thought about walking in at night 10 years ago. And now is this thriving neighborhood. It's about how you build those partnerships, how you're willing to share the risk on a vision of what you want to do. In a city that was falling apart and was declining, And so just let me end on a few principles. The one is, it's about leadership. It's about people willing to take a risk on a dream. And building strategic partnerships about how you do that. I want to just tell you a quick story. My wife and I, many years ago, were in the Peace Corps. And we were up the Paraguay River, a 3-day boat ride, up from Asuncion, up the river, away from any other towns. And we spoke Spanish, and a few miles through the jungle was Brazil, and they spoke Portuguese. And around us were a variety of Indian tribes that spoke different languages. And the enduring lesson we learned was that the most powerful person in the town wasn't the one with all the guns or all the money. It was the person who spoke all the languages. When we came back to the United States, we realized that we're the same way. We're divided by race and by class, by where we work, by ethnic origin, and really the most valuable person in a society today, I believe in our society, is people I call translators, that can articulate a vision that people can see a place for themselves. When Rex lived in Pittsburgh with his family, there was nobody that articulated a vision that said, Rex, stay with us because we have a future here. And that's the challenge in American society, is that for so many people, we're not articulating that vision of how they fit into a society that's getting turned upside down. In every city, and whole regions, as I mentioned, are doing that. So that leadership, the willingness to take risk, to not simply rush down to the lowest common denominator, but to get people to challenge them to think bigger about what their role is and how they shape opportunity. The other is, what's the vision? You know, I went to hundreds of neighborhood meetings, and a lot of you probably have been there, and there was always 100 people saying, we can't do this. It costs too much, always. We can't afford it, it's the wrong color, it's the wrong place, and we ought not to build it now. And you got to listen, and you got to understand that, but at the end of the day, if you're going to just maintain the status quo, nothing changes. And I worry, in much of American politics, is that elected officials, the safest place they want to be is in the planning process, because then they don't need to make a decision. So when somebody comes to me, and when an elected official says, oh, we'll study that, or we'll create a planning process, or we'll create a coalition to work on it, tell me the time, and tell me what you want to see happen. Not to say that you're going to impose that, but create a vision of what you want to do. And that there's a fine line there between community participation and leadership. And I think too many politicians are prepared to abdicate leadership under the banner of community participation. And I think that's part of the struggle going on in America right now, of trying to figure out how we invest in the future in a country that is desperately in need of that. Institutional capacity, and it's about a number of you. I was a mayor, and I could articulate to a group of people our vision. If you asked me to get you there, you'd be lost. I had really smart people, starting with a planning director. When I first got elected mayor, I was just happy if somebody would call me up to talk about wanting to invest in Pittsburgh. I could have cared less what it looked like. I could have cared less where it was. And I had a planning director that says, if we're going to build something, let's build something world class. We could have built a convention center that would have just been a convention center. I had a foundation community and planning directors that said, let's do an international competition and require this building to be a green building. In 1996 and 7, I didn't even know what that meant. And most people didn't. But they were people that understood the future, that understood that we needed to reach rather than get to the lowest common denominator very quickly. And that's the challenge that communities have. You need that institutional capacity. So when a developer came to me and said, Mayor, I have a great idea for you I want to invest in, I would say, with all due respect, you tell me why it's a great idea for you. I'll decide whether it's a great idea for us. My team will. And then if our self-interests come together, we'll make the investment. But it assumes that the city clearly understands its value structure of what it wants and what it wants to be, and whether this. And so many cities get trapped into doing transactions. So developer A comes and says, I want to build on this piece of property. And the city responds to that through zoning or maybe incentives or a variety of other. And there needs to be a grown-up in the room that says, in what context does that fit? What's the strategy? How catalytic is it? What's it going to change? And that conversation happens only if a city is clear on what its value structure is. And understand, we're a city that was polluted and had no access to our riverfronts, and we created a value structure that said, we're going to invest. And I had to go to people and say, we'd love for you to invest in Pittsburgh, but you can't put your building right on the riverfront because we're going to have a 25-mile continuous park. And they said, well, we're going to move then if you don't do that. Because they couldn't see the value of that park. But by the time we sort of negotiated and we got the park, and they were building their building 100 feet off the river, they were putting locker rooms in for their employees, and they were putting their cafeteria on the trail with tables outside to take advantage of this new green space. But they hadn't thought about it when they designed the building because everybody's back was turned to the rivers in Pittsburgh. It's all about creating that value where people see a place for themselves. And then I talked about financing. This is a huge risk, and no city has any money. But I'm going to say something to you. Every city has money. I was with the mayor of Philadelphia a month or so ago, and he was saying, how did you do all this in Pittsburgh? We have this big industrial site, and we'd love to do something with it, but I don't have any money. And I said, Mayor, what's your budget? And the budget of Philadelphia is over $1 billion a year. I said, you have money. It's a question of how important of a priority it is. And that's a choice that every city can make. It's a question of whether you're going to spend all your resources today or whether you're going to take some of them and invest them in the future. And that's a challenge that I think cities need to understand, and they need to articulate that to their voters, that we need to invest in our future. We can't just saying that we just have enough money to do today. I mentioned education. I don't want to talk. It's the single most important investment any community can make, and I'm talking about K through graduate school. Is it a city that makes this, recognizes this is your single most competitive advantage, and historically you have, as a city, will be successful. And the final is the design issue. Is if you're going to build something, it needs to be seen in the context of a great city, a world-class city. You've done, you're legendary in taking the highway off the river. That was a decision that created huge value for your city. I was there this morning, down along that river. It was packed. I figured, who's working, and why, do you have a holiday today? It was so crowded, right? People love it, and it creates value. And we watched the same thing happen in Pittsburgh, where we had no riverfront access, and now if you tried to take our riverfront park away, there'd be a revolution. And nobody would think about trying to build it right on the riverfront now and not leave the park there. And so that happens because people see the future, and they are willing to invest in it, and they're willing to do high quality design that's going to define the value structure of your community. And so we are a city, where Horatio Nelson Jackson said, we are at a moment in time when it's not just a cyclical bump in the road that we face with the recession, but a fundamental redefinition of society. I believe that. We're seeing it play out every day. And cities that understand that and begin to make the choices to invest in not what they were, but what they can become based on their opportunities, like the universities, like the rivers that people have, or the waterfronts, and how you get access to them, to the educational system, and how you bring people into that conversation at all levels of society will determine whether that cities will be successful or not. And so, you start with a remarkable base. You have the most livable city in America. You have a remarkable educational history. You have great civic planning, really the best in America. Your challenge is, do you rest on your laurels, or do you have the community will to grab the future? That's your challenge. Good luck.
Okay, so we have time for a few questions, and Matthew Gephardt, who was instrumental in organizing this. Matthew, why don't you start us off with the first question?
All right, well, I'll try and make it brief here, but you talked about trying to prioritize. Oh, thank you. So you talked about priorities and communities selecting their priorities, and one of the things that Ethan mentioned early on was Ernie Bonner sort of challenging us to consider equity as one of our key priorities, right? And I have a great quote from him that I pulled out about, in the context of limited resources, first and priority attention should be given to the task of promoting wider choices for those individuals and groups who have few, if any, choices. And so I wonder, in terms of considering that as one of our core goals, how does that work with making choices in terms of trade-offs, in terms of investing in large infrastructure projects versus, what's necessary in neighborhoods and the infrastructure in neighborhoods? So I would just pose that as a question.
Well, I'm glad you asked, Matthew. First thing I did when I became mayor was made myself chairman of our public housing authority. In Pittsburgh, we have the 6th largest public housing authority in the country. So we have over 20,000 units of public housing. Almost 13% of the population of Pittsburgh lived in public housing. Public housing, as probably is true in Portland, was in Pittsburgh the very worst places to live. I happen to live a couple blocks from a large public housing project. And you lived in one that we tore down. And I did that. And I'm the only mayor that U.S. Conference of Mayors is aware of that ever did it, and I know why. After having been there for 6 years, is that you don't make any friends. The people that live in public housing are the lowest income people in your community and have no place to go and don't trust government. So anything that you're going to suggest to them, they are not going to like, particularly if you're talking about tearing their communities down. And the people in surrounding neighborhoods don't like those people and don't want them to move into their neighborhoods. And yet, I believe that with 12 or 13% of the population of Pittsburgh stuck in really communities, I'm talking about large communities, 1,700 units, 5,000 people living in some of them, that with a whole culture of poverty, that you're not going to be successful at making the city change. And so we made a decision to engage, this before Hope 6, that Hope 6 came along and we used, and we tore down almost 6,500 units of public housing, and we rebuilt whole communities of thousands, about the same number of both affordable, low income, and market rate housing. We got a lot of awards for HUD from it, but we didn't get much support from our community. And part of the deal as citizens, as the public housing residents first didn't trust us and had chairs thrown at me and hung an effigy, and we really had some and this is about institutional capacity, some really smart people. And one of our scholars is working as a community builder in a public housing community of building the trust. Once we got that trust and the citizens of public housing supported the change, and then they saw in the first one we did the new buildings being built and an opportunity for themselves, we had lots of advocates for it. But part of the deal is that we want you to be moving to something. We want you to be educating yourself or moving to work, and we'll figure out how to help you. And so when I mentioned PNC Bank and the relationship we created with them to train people to move them into the employment that was being created in the back office operations, most of that came out of public housing residents that we were working with. And so it's about taking things that often in government are siloed, the real estate, and the job training, and the transportation, and a couple of other things that often aren't connected. And so PNC Bank is building a new operations center, and the people that live in public housing, by and large, don't know it's there, don't get connected to it in an easy way, and so you don't make the connection. And so we worked very hard to figure out how you build those relationships. So we had a redevelopment authority. My chief of staff was chairman of the redevelopment authority. I was chairman of the housing authority, and we met every week. And we required our department directors to be there every week, and we talked about how we build these systems. So when the money's there, every city through the Workforce Investment Board gets huge amounts of money for training right now, today. You're all getting, Portland is getting millions of dollars for training. I mean, it might be connected very well, or it might not be connected at all into that population that desperately needs that step forward of how do you get that training to get to the kind of jobs now being created in Portland, not the old jobs, but the new jobs being created. And it's building those relationships. And, you know, we have a strong mayor system, which gives you the ability to do that a little bit more maybe than what you have. But those connections become an important piece of how you move people from poverty into opportunity.
Okay, great. Another question. Meg's got a microphone back there, so if you have a question, got time for a few here. Okay. Well, it looks like we've got the questions. I want to thank one over here. Yep.
Looking at the,
Oh, Charles, can you speak into the microphone, please?
just looking at the slide about innovation and the large lead that the United States has in innovation, to what extent is that due to the fact that we have high levels of inequality between wealth and poverty? The fact that you have a lot of money to invest means that a lot of rich people have a lot of money. So that's a question of equity there.
Well, that's the huge equity question, and that I think the disparity that's happening there. I think for communities, it's how you connect people of low income into those opportunities that are being created. I mean, I think for us, we wanted big companies and small startup companies to be successful and for them to make a lot of money. What we wanted to be able to do is to connect the new generation of Pittsburgh into those jobs. And you know, I can't speak to the federal tax structure, which is, I think, part of the challenge in this, but from locally for us, I mean, we were very interested in getting people to create companies and to get venture capital invested. I think part of the challenge, and we did this in a very thoughtful way, part of the challenge is to get venture capital to invest in cities like Pittsburgh or Cleveland or Indianapolis and keep those jobs there that are being created rather than, I mean, if they get concentrated into Silicon Valley, they might as well be in China for a person in Cleveland, right? And I think that's part of the challenge, is how, and I think cities can play a big role in that. I'm not going to suggest that we can influence the national economy, but I think that there's good models in San Diego and Pittsburgh and the Research Triangle of cities in a very intentional way capturing some of that value in their, keep it in their communities, and then getting their citizens to access the opportunities that are created there.
Great.
Right?
Hi, how you doing, Mayor Murphy? I think a little easier on you than I did earlier, but a quote of yours. A quote of yours is, "You never say how you're going to pay for it. You have a vision and a dream of what you want to do, and then you figure out how to pay for it later."
No, you don't. You can't figure out how to pay for it later.
It is in the public sector with all the problems we're facing with unfunded liabilities and pensions. Do you think that's still possible?
Yeah, I do.
For us to do?
Yeah. Cities, you get $25 million a year in CDBG money right now from the federal government, probably. Portland does. Every city in America gets it. I don't know how you spend it. You can spend it on, as most cities do, on the day-to-day operations of your city and neighborhoods that are eligible. CDBG is Community Development Reinvestment Act. Or you can take a big chunk of that and use it to invest in housing and development in eligible neighborhoods. That's a choice you make today of money that you're getting every year. You might know how, my bet is you're using 75% of it to invest in roads and stuff in your neighborhoods that aren't making a significant difference. Just sort of keeping the hamster running on the wheel. Cities have the ability to do tax increment financing, which is taking the money from value you're creating because you're making smart investments and using it to invest further in the future, as you've done here with the university as a partner. So cities have lots of opportunities to do that, making choices about how they want to use their existing resources. You know, and some of it entails some risk that make people nervous, but so it's not simply saying we just, you know, it's a tough time, we have all this pension liability. At the end of the day, if you don't invest in the future, you're never going to get those problems solved either.
We've got a couple questions here, Cy, and then Ashley.
I'm a 1971 graduate of the University of Pittsburgh.
You're another failure. What did you graduate in?
Urban Studies.
Did you?
Pittsburgh was the most livable city in the country in 1983.
Right. By Rand McNally, but we feel more honored because The Economist is a national.
Okay, so I had the opportunity to study with Roy Luboff, historian.
Right. I know. Oh, yeah. I know.
20th century Pittsburgh, the
Right.
Pittsburgh Renaissance after
Right.
World War II.
Right.
Pittsburgh showed the way in urban renewal.
In the 60s.
How important, what was the relevance of that earlier experience in Pittsburgh, the alliance between the corporate sector and the Democratic Party that was so key to urban renewal back then? How did it influence the work?
Hugely. I mean, I mentioned, I keep talking about partnerships, and somebody that knows a little Pittsburgh history is the corporate community in Pittsburgh have a long history of partnering with the public sector. Corporate community, very Republican, still continues to be, partnering with a largely Democratic administration back in the 60s, transformed parts of Pittsburgh, some of them hugely successful, some of them big failures, 40 years later. That organization continued to exist, and I met with them every other week. And they were huge partners, and so when we would go to the legislature to get things changed, I went as a Democratic mayor, and the corporate community went as Republican leaders of the community. And so they were really important partners for us to be able to make this transformation. I hear a lot, government just needs to get out of the way. I think that is the wrong, I think it's a silly statement. From crime and education and infrastructure investments, you need, I think you need a strong government that is willing to take risk and partner with the community, with civic leadership to do things. And if you have a weak government just got out of the way, then you have a government that you can't have confidence in. And so I hear that a lot, and that's sort of the mantra that you hear. I think for certainly at the local level, governments, you want a strong partnership in the government, and we have that partnership, and that was for me a very important piece. That's why I keep talking about these partnerships, because I think, and the university is the third leg of that. We would meet every other week, sort of with a running agenda of how we're going to transform Pittsburgh. So that continues to be very healthy.
And let's give our last question up here to Ashley, and we got a microphone coming your way.
Thank you. San Francisco, as everyone knows, is the success of technology.
In spite of itself.
In spite of itself, of course. And Twitter, one of our new entries, wanted to expand, and they were going to leave the city. So the city went back to them and said, if you move your headquarters to Mid-Market, which is a rather depressed part of the city, it's a 4-block stretch of Market Street that abuts the Tenderloin, which has never recovered, never gotten any better. They said, if you move there, we'll remove the odious payroll tax from your company. And it's created a movement where Airbnb has moved there, Square has moved there. So all of these companies are able to move to this particular part of the city, and it's a win-win.
So that is an entrepreneurial city.
Yeah.
That's a city that is as entrepreneurial as Twitter is entrepreneurial, in the sense of saying, we will do something because we have a value. We want to see this neighborhood revitalize itself, and we believe you can be the catalyst, and it's worth this much for us. That decision was not a transaction, it was catalytic. It was strategic, and that's how cities need to act. And you don't think of San Francisco as acting like that. Typically, you
Wells
think of
Fargo wants it too.
This is the lesson I would have, is that, and I watch a lot of cities fall in this trap, is that they do create that, and then the next one in says, well, we want to do it too. So I don't know this particular one. So Twitter goes, it's catalytic. The market has changed, it's healthy, and now another company wants to go there and says, I want the same deal. If I were mayor, I would say we don't need the same deal now because the market's working. I watch Baltimore as an example. Anybody that's going to invest in downtown Baltimore gets a tax increment deal. Even though there have been now lots of developments and they've been healthy and the market's healthy, you don't need public involvement. I'm very conservative in that regard, as I think the public needs to intersect with the private sector in providing support like that if the market is risk, there's a risk involved in the market, and Twitter has choices. And you want Twitter to make that choice because there's a value that brings to the city beyond simply the job. And so you need to know that, and San Francisco knew that. This would be calculated. I'm afraid a lot of cities don't do that. So that's a good example.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Good luck to you, everyone.
Okay, well, thank you, Mayor Murphy, for coming. Before we leave, we got a couple things left to do. If you could just hold on for 1 second. First of all, I want to thank Professor Gebhardt, Trish Hamilton, and Meg Teedy for making this all possible. Without them, this would not have occurred. Thank you so much. I want to thank, again, the Bonner family, Lynn Bonner, Chris and Lee and Ashley and Brian, for helping to make this happen now for 6 years running, and for ensuring that these themes are themes that we come back to again and again and that we don't forget. And Brian, I'd like you to come forward because I think you have a few words to send it off as us off into the night. And with that, thank you very much.
They always ask me to make the altar call. If you haven't given money to your local institution, and particularly to the Bonner Scholarship, you need to tonight. There are forms outside, I'm sure. I want to tell you, would the scholarship recipients stand up, the past and current that are here? The two for this year? So I want to tell you briefly what we told them, and it goes in with choices and your challenge. You have a choice to accept the status quo, or you individually can say, sorry, there are no rules. We're going to do it different. We're going to rethink. You, as an individual, can say, I'm going to make a difference in my community, in my church, in my nonprofit, in my neighborhood. I am going to make sure that they knew I was here and I did something. And lastly, you have a choice to give back. You have a choice when the final tally is made to make sure that you were the net giver and not the net taker in your community. So your community will succeed because you participated, you broke the rules, and you gave back. Thank you for coming.